You touch my heart, thank you.
Good evening. And welcome. I am Dr. Medeva Ghee. I'm the Executive Director of the Leadership Alliance. And on behalf of the Leadership Alliance family, we are proud to present a conversation with the United States Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. This conversation is the culminating event of a day-long strategic meeting that convened college and university presidents and leaders from public and private sectors to identify strategies that will strengthen the diversity of America's workforce to ensure economic growth, global competitiveness, and enrich the well-being of our society. These discussions are critical such that stories like Justice Sotomayor's are no longer the exception, and such that where we come from and who we are does not dictate where we go and what we do. Our goal at the Leadership Alliance is to train, mentor, and inspire talented students from a diversity of backgrounds, expose them to the research environment, launch careers, and inspire a lifetime of success. A significant part of Justice Sotomayor's story includes the mentors who influenced her success and the opportunities she earned along the way. We are honored that Justice Sotomayor will share her inspirational story with us. But first, introductions are in order. Associate Justice Sonia Sotomayor was born in the Bronx, New York, on June 25, 1954. She earned a BA in 1976 from Princeton University. Yeah. Some Princeton alums.
Hello.
Graduating summa cum laude and receiving the university's highest academic honor. In 1979, she earned a J.D. from Yale Law School, where she served as an editor of the Yale Law Journal. She served as assistant district attorney in the New York County District Attorney's Office from 1979 to 1984. She then litigated international commercial matters in New York City at Pavia and Harcourt, where she served as an associate and then partner from 1984 to 1992. In 1991, President George H.W. Bush nominated her to the U.S. District Court, Southern District of New York, and she served in that role from 1992 to 1998. She served as a judge on the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit from 1998 to 2009. President Barack Obama nominated her as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court on May 26, 2009, and she assumed this role August 8, 2009. Moderating the conversation, we are happy to have Dr. Christina Paxson, the 19th president of Brown University. Where she is professor of economics and public policy. Prior to her appointment at Brown in 2012, President Paxson was dean of the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs. Building on Brown's academic excellence to prepare students to thrive in today's complex and changing environments are the defining objectives of her presidency. Key areas include empowering collaboration and cultivating entrepreneurship among teacher scholars and their students, as well as expanding Brown's research environment. A highly respected leader in higher education, her personal scholarship has focused on international economic problems of economic inequality, health, and development. President Paxson is a 1982 Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Swarthmore College and earned her graduate degrees in economics at Columbia University. So we're really looking forward to this conversation, and in order for everyone to enjoy this, I invite you to be present in the moment. not you and your mobile device. So please, right now, take the time to turn off all mobile devices. No photos or recordings are allowed during the conversation. It gives me great pleasure to present to you U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor and President Christina Paxson.
Hello.
Hello. So this is great. We've had a wonderful day talking about the Leadership Alliance, and I can't think of a better way to conclude the day than to have a discussion with you. So I'm just delighted that you're here.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be a part of this.
So when just to give a little bit of framing before we plunge into questions, we talked about a number of things today that I think are very relevant to your life, and I hope you agree. And one is that the Leadership Alliance...
I've learned something on the court.
Don't
agree before you know the question.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then you can tell me. We've talked a lot about mentoring. We've talked a lot about the importance of mentoring, and as Medeva said, we're aiming to propel students to really wonderful careers in research and realizing the importance of mentors in their lives, and I think that's something that we'll have a chance to talk about. And we've talked a lot about just creating opportunities for students and also how we can change our institutions, our universities, and our colleges so that they can support the majority university population that we're going to be serving over the next 50 and 100 years. So it's really a big challenge, and it's a great opportunity. The other thing that I wanted to note, though, was that this year, all Brown first-year students, before they started, they read My Beloved World. And it was a required summer reading. They read your books. They bought your books, right? And the thing that was really wonderful was we have a series of seminars where faculty meet with students, and it's called the First Seminar because it's their first Brown class ever. And so we talked about your book. And this year, because the book was so, people were so excited about it, that a number of staff decided that they wanted to do first-year seminars too. So they read the book and we had staff seminars. So I had the pleasure of leading a staff seminar as well as a student seminar. And I got to ask the students what I should ask you.
Oh.
Right? And so my questions are not maybe exactly how they would have phrased them, but they're very much in the spirit of the things that the students wanted to hear. So let's get started. This is mainly about your book and what's in your book. I wanted to start by talking a little bit about your early life. And as you express, you had an amazing family, but you experienced a lot of hardship. And poverty, the death of your father, diabetes. And, reading the book, it's clear that, at least I think, it gave you a sense of proportion about what's important in life. And some people might turn hardship into a life of service, as you have. Some people don't. What's the difference?
I speak in the book a little bit about this because I had a cousin, my childhood soulmate. He was 6 months older than I was. If you see any of our family pictures in the possession of any family member, if I'm in the picture, he's next to me. That's how close we were. And he took a very different path than I did, even though he was much, much more intelligent than I was. He was a national science winner in grammar school. His project was so sophisticated that they questioned whether he had done it or an adult had done it, and his father had to go in and fight to show them that he had conceived of the idea and implemented it himself. But Nelson took a very different path, ended up addicted to drugs, and attended a variety of different colleges at which he succeeded at none. And I'm not even sure he ended up graduating from a college, and ultimately died of AIDS when he was 28 years old. One of the most heartbreaking situations for me personally. Losing him was losing such an important part of my life, my soul, my being. And I actually, as I was writing the book, thought long and hard about where our paths had diverged and what was it that had caused me to take one direction and he another. And there are some environmental causes, not the least of which was the allure of the streets for a young Hispanic man. And that leads me to something that I think contributes to the delinquency of so many of our young people, and that is the streets. If you come from the hard neighborhoods that we did, I lived and he lived in what was then the highest criminal crime area in the entire United States, Fort Apache. For kids who are interested, there's a movie about it. And it shows you what we faced back then. But he was male and I was female. I wasn't permitted to go out and play alone. He was. And I think that that was to his detriment. I was asked once the same question by some of my colleagues, but with a more pointed question of what can we do to avoid his path? And I said, we need after-school programs. We need supervised after-school programs in all of these neighborhoods, in our schools, in our community centers, and we need to gear them to programs that will attract the kids and keep them. And so some of the most successful programs, of which I'm still promoting and appear at and go visit because they do the right thing, are the ones that kids go to every day, that have a variety of different activities that can appeal to the interest of the entire group, and where adults are serving as mentors, but not distant members, but present at every moment. So the kids are not involved in bringing drugs in or using them or involving themselves in unhealthy activities, but are engaged in activities that interest them. And so there is one center in the Bronx called the Bronx Renaissance Center. That's the model. They're there every single day. They're there on weekends if they don't have home supervision. The activities range from STEM classes, which they're forced to attend, but to interest activities, photography, clothing design, music, band playing. They even invite police officers from the community to be part of the music that the center is producing. So they're accomplishing two goals rather than one. They're working with the kids in the activity they like, music playing, but also engaging them in interactions with police officers to try to improve community relations. So for me, those kinds of activities, if they had existed for Nelson, I think would have been a path out of the one he was headed into. I had the benefit of being a protected young female child, and I wasn't permitted to play in the streets by myself. And my mother would not ever permit me to hang out with a boyfriend in the stairwell. All right? Didn't mean we didn't try, but it did mean that when we did, it was very short-lived, okay? And I do think that's a very important part of keeping kids focused on a different path. Those are the sort of environmental influences. Obviously, you have to awaken in a child something that will drive them to want to engage in life. My adversity did that for me because at a certain point with my diabetes, I realized that I was living a privileged life because I didn't know how long I had to live back then. I always start with this caveat when I complete this part of the conversation. When I was diagnosed with diabetes, it was 1963. The care of diabetes was at best rudimentary, and on some levels barbaric. When they tested my blood, they would take a little sliver of a razor and cut my finger. Talk about painful, okay? Needles were this thick. And I may be exaggerating because that's the way I saw it as a child, but they were very, very thick. And so every time they drew blood, it was a very excruciating experience. All of that has changed, but so has the prognosis of my condition. And back then, I learned to live with what I thought was the reality that I wasn't going to live a very long life. You weren't expected to last past your 40s. And I met people who took very good care of themselves, but who still suffered from complications that took their lives at relatively young ages. And so, but I realized, instead of despairing from it, that I had to learn how to live every moment of my life as if it was my last. To take as much enjoyment from life as I humanly could, but to pack it in with as many experiences as I could. And so I was never one of those students who ever thought of a year off. I had to get to where I was going fast. And I had to do everything really fast. And so I don't have that kind of energy now. I've lived much longer than I thought. But I was one of those students who went to school, never missed school, did every after-school activity that interested me, went home and studied till very late at night. Saturday and Sundays worked because I had to work, but I would party every Friday and Saturday night. I still party a lot. How do you instill in a child the realization that joy, but not just the joy of partying, but the joy of understanding that that's only one part, an important part, but one part of the joy of learning in life, of curiosity, of understanding that there's a world out there open for them to explore and to find themselves in. Mm-hmm. And I think that is what teachers have to help parents do. That's what I think schools are sometimes forgetting to do. As I talk to students from these high-achieving grammar schools and middle schools and high schools, and parents are telling me how they're worried, how stressed their child seems to be, I think they're losing out on making learning something that should be fun.
You were a reader, right?
I'm sorry, what?
You were a big reader.
I was a huge reader.
I think that's
I tell kids,
right?
it was my rocket ship to the world. Yeah. And to the universe, because I learned about other parts of the world that I someday wanted to visit. I explored Venus and Mars and the moon through reading. It, to me, was not only an escape from my hardship, and a very important escape from my hardship, but it was also a window to things that I didn't know about. Right. But the short answer to your question is, I don't give short answers. That I think what makes the difference is a child who's exposed to the joy of life. Yeah. And that doesn't have to come from a joyful home, because most of us don't come from those backgrounds. Yeah. But it can come, and should come, I think, through our education or activities after school, or some part of a child's environment that can give them that. Right.
Thank you. So let's move forward to college. And I loved your description of visiting Harvard, visiting Princeton. I was wondering why you didn't stop at Brown on the way down.
Wait a minute, I didn't even know Brown existed.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
If you read my book, you'll know I didn't know Harvard or Princeton existed. So forget about the others.
No, that's okay. I'm just kidding you. But, you know, in your book, some of your descriptions about what it was like to be a first-generation college student, you know, throwing away the Phi Beta Kappa invitation, they were amazing. And we're spending a lot of time, in fact, there are students, graduates in the audience who have worked with me on this in supporting first-gen students better. And many universities are doing this. So give us advice. What do you wish Princeton had done that it didn't do?
Not make an assumption that everybody knows life and how to live it. You know something, I got to Princeton and I stumbled upon how to open a checking account. Mm-hmm. With my mother, when we worked at the Joint Hospital, when I worked there, she was a nurse there, and she did this without me, and for I don't know how many years. Our paychecks came, we walked to the local money order place that cashed the paycheck. Now that is less likely today, but I think most kids from backgrounds similar to myself do not have parents that are doing anything more than living paycheck to paycheck, and probably not well. Do they have any financial savvy in terms of how to balance a checkbook, how to plan their existence for a week or for a month outside of just basic, I gotta eat today, I'll worry about tomorrow? No. Do they know how to dress? Do they know how to ask questions in a classroom? Do they know, outside of their own natural intelligence, the best techniques for studying? All right? Do they know, like I didn't know, the best technique for writing a college paper? I think these issues are still present today. They have not disappeared. Do kids intuitively know that it's important to reach out in a classroom and ask a question, get to know the professor, make use of office hours? These are just fundamental things that you probably think common sense should tell you, but common sense can't tell you what you haven't experienced. Right. All right? And so there's no such thing in our world, and I still consider myself a part of that, where any of this comes naturally. You know, I got to law school and people said, go join a study group. I had no idea what a study group was or what it should do. I never did. Now, I got through Yale pretty well without a study group, okay? By dint of, you know, working by myself at it. But that was really unnecessary. And I think it would have been very helpful at Yale and perhaps even at Princeton to talk about study groups and to make the most important point, which nobody really tells you. Don't have a study group with your friends. All right? Not because they're incapable of studying, but because we pick our friends by people who are like us, and their world may be as broad or as limited as your world, but what new are you going to learn from people who are like you? So when you pick a study group, especially if you're in law school or graduate school or in any field, pick people who appear to bring skills you don't possess. Find some of those really smart people in the group. Ask one of them to be a part of your group. You know, find someone that appears to be doing something you can't do in class and ask them to come and talk to you about it. But I think that it's not just Brown, I think it's every educational institution has to start from square one and understand that when we're coming to your institutions, that many kids are missing some of the basic life skills that you think they possess. but their environment is very different than that one. And most importantly, your mentors have to work on our writing skills. Most of us come with a deficit, a severe deficit in that area, even when we're at the top of our classes. And I was at the top of a fairly decent Bronx high school. And in retrospect, I know what happened. I was really smart. I read a lot. I had a lot of ideas. And I would spew them on paper, and they were probably more thoughtful than most of my classmates, and I got an A. But nobody sat down to tell me that I wasn't expressing myself clearly.
Yeah.
And when I got to Princeton, as you know from my book,
First paper,
I found out I wasn't.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah.
My point is that for our first generation, we need that kickstart. We need someone from the very beginning to hold our hand and point us in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, you know, you mentioned mentoring, and mentors were important not only at college, but through law school and then your legal career. And, you know, you managed to create this amazing network of mentors. And I guess could you talk a little bit about what you learned from them and what it means to have a great mentor? What makes for a great mentor?
I'm going to answer your question.
Okay.
All right? But I'm going to answer it by telling you what I think you have to do as a mentee. All right? You have to figure out what it is you need mentoring on. You have to find someone who is doing something in a way that you don't know how to do. And you have to find the role model that you want to emulate. That means sort of a self-evaluation as a mentee. What is it that I have to learn how to do better? What do I need to do to be successful like that person? I have to watch them and see how they do what they're doing. And so if you look at my college experience, my first mentor was the professor who sat down with me and taught me how to write. I figured out from my first paper that I didn't know how to write. I looked around among my professors. He was the only one who gave me back my first paper with comments about what I had done wrong. And I realized, he is paying attention. Let me go talk to him. And I went, and he had circled a few things, and I asked him, why did you circle this? And he said, Sonia, look at your very first phrase, authority of dictatorship. He said, that's very convoluted. It should be dictatorial authority. And he said, I think that you're writing or thinking in Spanish and you're translating into English. There are adjectives in Spanish, but many adjectives are introduced with the of. And so we don't say cotton shirt, we say shirt of cotton. All right? And he said, that's not unusual in Spanish. You have to go through your paper and correct all of those. As soon as I found him, I glommed on. I took all of his courses. Every paper I did, I would go back and ask him what I needed to correct next, and he would help me. But I went out and bought grammar books and read the grammar books again. So I wasn't letting him do all the work. I was showing my own initiative in going out and getting books, and he could see that I was really trying, that I was bringing something to the conversation. So that is how I reached every mentor. I would look at them, I would offer to work with them, because you know when you pick mentors, usually they're very busy people. It takes time to work with you. You should give something back in return. Help them. That's how people make time for you. And so at work, I looked for the attorneys I really respected, I was assigned to other attorneys, but I would take on their work and work extra. And I would then talk to them and learn from them by working extra. No one's going to hand you anything. You have to work with them. So what takes being a good mentor? Being honest with your mentee. I think the most important thing any mentor can do is to look at you and say, you need to work on this. You're great at X, Y, Z, but these are things that you have to pay attention to for this reason. The good mentor doesn't try to pigeonhole a mentee into his or her own expectation of what's good. You listen enough to what their aspirations are, and you try to guide them in a direction that fulfills what they want to do. Too many of us want to create little clones of ourselves when we're mentors. Mm-hmm. I spend a lot of time with my law clerks trying to figure out where their path in law should go. Mm-hmm. And I think it's not an easy thing to do as a mentor, but that's one of the things. And reciprocally, as a mentee, pick people who can teach you things and work with them and for them. Give them help the same way they're helping you, because it should be a symbiotic relationship.
So part of mentorship is about listening. Mm-hmm. And you actually write in your book about, I guess I would call it strategic listening. I can't remember if that's what you call it. But
no, it's a good description.
It's in there, strategic listening. And you know, we live in a very polarized time, both publicly but also on campuses, where we could probably use a little bit more strategic listening. And do you have any advice? I know that's a very wide open question. But
oh, very.
Yeah, sorry.
No. Well,
I mean, how do we restore
right.
societies where we actually listen to each other and talk to each other instead of scream at each other?
I tell young lawyers this, but I think it's part of navigating life. I don't think it's just about law, which is you really can't get someone to compromise unless you understand what their needs are. Because what you think is a compromise is not, if for the other person it's not satisfying any of what they need. And so think of a simple compromise, the one that your parents do every day, okay? You and your sibling are fighting over what to eat, what movie to go to, whatever. What do your parents usually say? We'll eat this tonight and the other thing tomorrow. We'll see that movie tonight, next week we'll see the other. They understand, intuitively or otherwise, that both children want to do something different, that they have different tastes. But whatever you propose has to satisfy their need to eat that food or to see that movie. You can defer need, but you can't eliminate it. You can't look at anybody and say, you should want the steak I want. And that is pretty much what happens in our larger conversations in society. We tell people, I want what I want, you want what you want, and I'm not going to let you have what you want. We're never going to reach anything, any solution, if that you can't do this, you have to satisfy me, is the answer. So for me, strategic listening is always about trying to understand what it is the other person needs. Why is it that they're responding this way? What worries them? What do they think is important? What do you think, not what you think, but what do they think is important to them? And then asking the backup question, why? Why is it important to them? Because you can substitute things that people want, but only if you know what it is they want it for. Mm-hmm. And so that's what strategic thinking to me is like. It was always, I mean, for lawyers it's somewhat simpler, but I'll give you a lawyerly example, okay? If I settle with you, I'll have to settle with everybody else. Well, usually you'll say we'll have a confidentiality agreement because the need was to keep this secret, all right? Now, the reality is that very little is secret. So many people will tell you, no, that's not enough. So you sit there and you go, what can she or he give you that saves face? All right? Can they admit something? Can they give a letter? What can they do to save face for the other person? Those are strategic listening. What are the needs that the other person has? And we don't spend a whole lot of time figuring that out. We don't figure out how we can compromise that. Look, one of the biggest social issues today is the immigration issue, okay? We have lots and lots of conversations around it, and I understand both sides. The side of the immigrants who have come and worked hard and given much to our communities, who have, I think, a legitimate sense that they're both contributors and entitled to be a part of our community. Mm-hmm. You have the other side that's worried about immigrants taking jobs, about people doing things that are illegal. So working on a solution that's broader based and looks at all of the needs and tries to find an answer is better than saying, no, you're just un-American, one side or the other. And we do a lot more of that than trying to work out compromises.
Right.
You know, but I do think they exist. We just have to be willing to identify our own needs better.
Right. Okay. Well, look, people submitted questions before, and I don't want to take all your time. I know that there are a number of questions that the audience members have submitted.
All right.
And they want to hear the answers. And Medeva, you're gonna ask them, right?
So thank you so much for catalyzing the
All right.
conversation.
If you read my book, you know that when I was a child, I was an ají, a hot pepper. I never sat still. I'm an adult and I still have a problem sitting still. I sat longer than I want to.
Thank you.
Chris, you were very engaging. I'm going to walk around you, in part because the people back there should see me a little better. In part, because I think it engages you more. But there's a trick to my walking around. You see these guys? They're here to protect me from me. They don't like me doing this, okay? And if you stand up or start crowding me, they get nervous. So if you stay seated, they'll be okay. And they won't pull me off the floor, all right? I will give some handshakes, I'll touch you on the back, I might even give people hugs. But I don't do selfies. And so you know why? Because I look horrible in them. All right. Who's going to ask? Who's going to tell me who the questions? Hello.
So first question.
Yes.
As a Latina justice of the Supreme Court, you have adapted to an environment where you are the minority. What advice do you have for minorities in science to establish a sense of belonging despite being the minority?
You have to make friends out of your own group. You have to join activities that are not just activities among your friends. You have to take the plunge and learn about the people that you're in that environment with, because they might not do it in return. They're, in some ways, as scared and as unfamiliar with you as you are with them. And so you have to take the initiative to build the gap. I have always said, in every institution I've been at, I've been a leader in the Puerto Rican or the minority community. At Princeton, I was head of Acción Puertorriqueña y Amigos, and as I was on the Third World Center Governance Board, okay? At Princeton, similarly, I was the head of the LASA students, but I was also a part of the coalition group that worked together on improving admissions of Third World students. But I did other things. I went out and I was on the disciplinary committee, I worked at the computer center, I lived in environments where my friends didn't live. I had a non-Hispanic roommate. I picked someone who was very different than me, but I wanted to learn about her and her family. But didn't mean I didn't interact with my friends. They were my security blanket, you know? When I was scared or something, or when I wanted to party. The others didn't party as well as we did. But I went to some of their parties. I learned how to drink wine. You have to reach out. It's not just them. It's us. Come on, come on. Stay low. And so you have to initiate building the bridge so that you become comfortable with other people. You have to learn how to look at people who are not like you and say, what was your life like? And that's a hard thing to ask.
Thank you.
But it's an okay thing to ask. People like talking about themselves. It is. You have to ask, where do you come from? What's your family like? What are your hardships? You know, if you listen to some of that, sometimes you figure out, I have it a lot easier than some other people do.
Thank you. Next question. What do you think is the biggest challenge that our justice system and our nation faces today? And what must our generation learn or keep in mind in order to maintain a just and fair society despite our differing opinions?
We cannot become an equal society until we equalize educational opportunity. Think about how most jurisdictions fund education on property value. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So, what are the schools in minority neighborhoods going to be if they're basing it on property values? All right? We have to start thinking more globally about how to equalize education. How do we fund it? How do we ensure the quality of teaching? And I'm not talking about the common curriculum of today. I'm talking about more important thoughts about how do we ensure that every child receives a meaningful education? And we're not doing that in this country. And so until we fix that, I don't think we're going to come any closer to equality in our society. And we're certainly not going to come much closer to fairness in our society. Because until we all have that basic skill that education provides us with, we're not going to be able to compete in the marketplace. We don't right now. And we're not going to be able to look at each other as equals. And that is perhaps our greatest goal. When we don't look at the color of each other's skin, or the shape of our eyes, or the accent we possess, but we can engage with each other on a common language of understanding. And I think education permits you to do that.
What advice, yes, that's it. What advice would you give to minorities, especially women, who aspire and are working to be among the top within their respective field?
Ask that question again, I'm sorry. How to what?
What advice would you give to minorities, especially women, who aspire and are working to be among the top within their respective field?
I'm going to answer that. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold from last week still, but I don't have it now. So don't worry. Last week I wouldn't have done this. I don't believe that anyone can be successful in life until they find their own passion. You can't really be the best at something unless you want to be the best at something, and you have to like what you're doing to be the best at it. And so you have to find in your own life what is that thing that you are motivated to do well. And then you have to figure out how to develop your skills to do it as well as you humanly can. And so that means finding the passion, finding the skills you need to improve to do it the best, and then doing it. I firmly believe, and people are always asking me, did you aspire to be a Supreme Court justice? And I have a longer answer, but basically, I had no idea what a Supreme Court justice was until I got to college, okay? I may have heard about it in high school, but this was the age before the internet, all right? Maybe it was a part of a newspaper article, but even if I had been interested, it would have been hard to remember I was interested to get to the library to research it. But I knew that law was something I wanted to do. I wanted to be a lawyer. Why did I want to be a lawyer? Well, I knew that there were a lot of things I wasn't good at. I can't sing, dance, draw. I'm not creative in any way, except in the law. All right? But I knew I couldn't do any of those things. So I wasn't going to go into television, movie making, writing, books, or things of that nature. I just knew I wasn't good at that. I had diabetes. I had spent a lot of time in hospitals. I personally wanted nothing to do with the health field. Some people do. Some people have conditions and they want to find the cure. That wasn't me. You have to judge yourself. You can't define who you are by other people's expectations, by other people's likes or dislikes. You have to look at yourself and say, what do I like? And there's nothing wrong in liking things other people don't. You know, I have friends who love being accountants. You put me in a room with numbers all day, I'll go stir crazy. But they don't, and there's nothing wrong with them. That's just who they are. So you have to figure out who you are. And then you have to work at each job to make yourself as good at it as you humanly can. And not merely because you want to improve your skills, but because the reality is that when you're good at something, people notice you. And when people notice you, they help you. That's how people get promoted in jobs. Because others look at how well they're doing their job, and they give them another job to do. And they give them something more important the next time. And that's how you become who you want to become. Now, from every job I've ever had, some of them more interesting than others. That's the nature of work and life. Even in the Supreme Court, there are moments I'm bored. There are a lot less and far in between. But you know, every year I go through 8,500 cert petitions every week, anywhere from 200 to 300 of them. As I'm doing it near the end, I can tell you, I can get a little tired, all right? And it's not that I'm less interested in those cases, but reading that much over a period of time you can get a little distracted, all right? That's true of every job. There are interesting things and not so interesting things. So how do you keep your excitement up in a job? Get interested in learning new things. Figure out what you need to do, make it routine, do it well, but then set your sights on learning something else. Because if you do that, people will see your ambition. And people like people who are ambitious. They like people who are always curious about learning something new. So if I give you any advice as a person of color, as a human being, be creative about figuring out who you are and how to impress by doing the best job you can, and about learning as much as you can.
Thank you. So last question. Can you describe a specific example of when your perspective as a female Nuyorican judge helped to better inform a decision you made in the court?
None of us are one thing. None of us are just a black person, a Hispanic person, an Asian person, a white person. We're too complex as human beings. Not one thing defines us. We're a conglomerate of every experience we have in life. I'm not just a woman. I'm not just a Latina. I am also the child of a single parent who had an alcoholic parent. I am a product of having 12 years of Catholic school education. All right? Good and bad. Mostly good. I went to Ivy League schools. I've been a prosecutor. I've been a corporate lawyer. I've been a district court judge, a circuit court judge, now a Supreme Court justice. I've volunteered in a bunch of different sort of activities. I was on the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund, so I've done some civil rights work. I have also been on the Maternity Center Board. I'm not a mother, but I helped guide some of the issues that were being addressed about maternity care for women. All of those experiences and so many others have made me Sonia. I can't pick out my Latina-ness and say to you, that influenced this decision. Because there isn't one thing that ever created a decision in one way. I can tell you one case where, or two actually. Hello. one had to do early on in my career with a law in New York that let police take your car if they believed the car had been used in the commission of a crime. They could move to forfeit your car. And New York law then, before the case came to me as a circuit court judge, permitted the police to hold on to that car so long as a criminal investigation was going on, and you had to wait for a hearing on the forfeiture claim by the police. That could take sometimes years. A lot of times, the cars belonged to people who didn't commit the crime. All right? And so the issue was, should those people be deprived of their car? They didn't commit the crime. But you couldn't get a hearing for a long time. So before us was the question of whether this was constitutional, this law, of holding on to the car without a hearing, so that someone who was an innocent owner of the car could get the car back. We're at the hearing. One of my colleagues looks up to the lawyer who's arguing before him and says, "So who really needs a car in Manhattan? You can take a bus, a train, or a subway, or a taxi." And the lawyer sort of got balled up and started going into legal jazz. And I later looked at my colleague and said, the taxi drivers, the gypsy cab drivers need their car. The delivery people who are working for Domino's Pizza have these beat up jalopies that they're using to deliver pizza. There's lots of people who live in other places that are inaccessible, need their cars. How about the cleaning people out in Long Island at all the major hotels? They need their cars. Those hotels are in isolated areas. I said, no, you're thinking about Manhattan, but you're not thinking about the human condition. All right? Now, I can't tell you, same thing at an oral argument in the Supreme Court. One of my colleagues, it was a case about cell phones and police searching cell phones. And one of my colleagues said, who owns 2 cell phones? Suggesting that only drug dealers did. There was a drug dealer involved in the case, okay? And I whispered and sent a note to him and said, the lawyer who's before you. In part because every government attorney, every government employee has a government phone and has a personal phone, okay? And a lot of people who have company phones have their personal phones, because you shouldn't want your company or your employer tracking your telephone calls, all right? And if you don't, you should. Now, did either of those 2 statements make a difference in that other judge's decision-making? I doubt it, because the legal decisions are much, much more complex than the one question or the one issue. But you don't know how those misperceptions or those lacks of knowledge are influencing how people are approaching a problem, how they're generally thinking about them. And to the extent that your life experiences can help inform others about a broader picture, about something that was less important to them, but you can explain why it's more important to someone else, it can make a difference, I think. It certainly makes a difference in the dialogue. The outcome might not be different. Look at my Utah decision. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you. But I think that an informed conversation is a conversation. An uninformed one is a dialogue. And so for me, as I said, does it make a difference? I think it makes a difference in any sphere of living, that you have as many perspectives as you can bring to it, to any problem that we have in society, whether it's a technical problem, a scientific problem, a human problem. Everyone, through their different lenses, can come together and I think see a picture more clearly.
We wanted to give Justice Sotomayor a small token of our big appreciation, and so we have this wonderful plaque. It's the Leadership Alliance Distinguished Service Award presented to Justice Sonia Sotomayor in recognition of exemplary service and dedicated leadership, November 2016.
Thank you. I want to thank this Leadership Alliance for your very existence. What you are doing in talking about, thinking about, and discussing ways to make us a more diverse community is so critically important to our future as a country and as a world. The US has taken leadership in so many areas. The fact that we continue to strive to find equality in America, but by doing it in ways like this, making concrete choices about how to improve our situation is so important. Thank you all for the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can I give you a hug?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I'll see you around, I promise. I'll see you around, I promise I will do it.
This has been a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, my team, the Program Planning Committee, the National Academy of Sciences, the Leadership Alliance institutions. As you go back to your campuses and to your workplace, I encourage you to listen and really take heed to what Justice Sotomayor said, and turn from spectators into doers, and to follow your dreams wherever they may lead you. There's a lovely quote from Eleanor Roosevelt that said, "The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams." Thank you so much for coming. Have a wonderful evening.